A man at the pool told her to pack up and leave because he thought she didn't belong there. What he didn't know? She's lived there for nearly a decade, and she's also the chief of police. Patrice Holman didn't need much. A folded lounge chair, a good pair of sunglasses, and a day with no calls from dispatch. That was all she'd asked for. After 3 straight weeks of back-to-back shifts and enough internal meetings to make anyone question their career choice, this Saturday felt like the first real breath she'd taken in a while. It was just past noon when she stepped out her back door, sliding on a pair of sandals and cradling a water bottle under her arm. She lived in a small, gated community in Temecula, California. Quiet, middle income, mostly families, retirees, and a few tech folks who liked the suburbs. She'd lived here for over 9 years, bought the house outright, knew every board member of the HOA by name, so when she walked the short distance down to the shared pool, she felt like she belonged. Because she did. Patrice wasn't in uniform. She was off duty, and it showed. Her long-sleeved tee hung loose over black capri joggers, and her hair was tied up in a quick bun. No makeup, no badge. She looked like someone's tired mom. And that was exactly what she wanted. Normalcy. She stepped through the iron gate and waved at the lifeguard, a college kid named Luis, who'd greeted her a dozen times before. He gave her a nod and a "Good afternoon, Ms. Holman." She smiled, found a chair near the shallow end, and sat down with a quiet sigh. The pool was only half full. A couple of older couples were reading paperbacks, kids splashed near the edge, and a young mum in a sundress was trying to coax her toddler into floaties. It was peaceful, warm, and still. Patrice closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't thinking about work, not about the officer who'd filed a late report, not about the new recruits she was supposed to evaluate, not about the politics from City Hall, just the sun, the occasional burst of laughter, and the rhythmic splashing of water. Minutes passed. She wasn't asleep, just resting. Then, footsteps, loud, confident ones. Coming closer, she opened her eyes slowly. A tall white man in khaki shorts and a tucked-in polo shirt was standing not far from her chair. He wasn't smiling, wasn't holding a towel, didn't look like someone enjoying a day at the pool. He looked like someone looking for a problem. "Excuse me," he said, his voice laced with polite sarcasm. "Do you live here?" She blinked, sat up slightly. "Yeah, I do, really," he replied, folding his arms across his chest. "Because I've never seen you here before. This pool's for residents only." Patrice studied him. No one else seemed to notice the conversation yet. She looked him over, newly printed HOA pamphlet peeking out of his pocket, not a drop of sweat on him. Maybe this was his first summer here. "I live 3 houses down," she said calmly. "Been here almost a decade." He gave a short laugh, the kind that was less about humor and more about disbelief. "Right. And you just happened to wander in?" "No," she replied, still seated. "I used the gate like everyone else." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "You know, we've had some issues with people sneaking in from outside. You'd understand why I have to say something." Patrice tilted her head. "What's your name?" He hesitated for a beat. "Dennis. Dennis Whitlow. I just moved in last month, and I take the rules pretty seriously." She nodded slowly. "Well, Dennis, I live here. If you'd like to check the HOA directory, you'll find me listed. Patrice Holman." He didn't move. Instead, he looked over his shoulder like he expected someone to back him up. No one was paying attention. Yet. The young mom was still trying to negotiate with her toddler. Luis, the lifeguard, had earbuds in. The pool might have been half full, but in that moment, it felt like it was just the two of them. Dennis took a small step closer, still standing tall, still wearing that smug look of someone who thought he was catching someone in the act. "You don't have a key fob on you," he pointed out. "It's in my bag," she replied, not offering to prove it. He looked her over, his eyes narrow. "I'm going to call the HOA board and report this." She shrugged lightly. "You're welcome to." He opened his mouth like he had more to say, but nothing came out. But Patrice could already tell. This wasn't about rules. This was about assumptions. And Dennis wasn't quite finished making them. Dennis didn't walk away. Instead, he stood his ground like a security guard on a power trip. Patrice knew this posture. She'd seen it too many times in too many forms. On sidewalks, at school meetings, even inside courtrooms. It was the posture of someone who'd already decided who you were, and didn't expect to be wrong. I just think it's odd, he continued, now pacing slightly, that I've been here a whole month, and I've never seen you once. You'd think neighbors would have run into each other by now. Patrice leaned back in her chair. Or maybe you've just been looking in the wrong direction. That didn't sit well with him. He let out a quick scoff. Right. Look, you can make this easy, or we can call security and figure it out that way. She didn't move. Dennis, I told you. I live here. His voice got sharper. I don't need attitude. And I don't need to be interrogated at my own pool, she said calmly, her eyes never leaving his face. There was a pause. The air around them was still relaxed, but the conversation had a weight now. A few people started to glance over. Not stare. Just flickers of attention. That's all it takes sometimes. Dennis gestured toward her bag. So, why not just show me your fob then? Because I don't owe you anything, she replied. I'm not about to prove something to a man who decided I don't belong here before I even said a word. That struck him. A muscle in his jaw twitched, but he stayed on script. You're making this harder than it needs to be. If you have nothing to hide, then what? She cut in. You'll let me stay? He hesitated, surprised that she'd spoken up so directly. Patrice wasn't angry. Not yet. But she'd spent over 25 years in law enforcement. She'd trained officers in conflict de-escalation. She knew exactly what Dennis was doing, trying to control the narrative, force compliance, make her smaller so he could feel taller. I don't need your permission, she added. At that moment, an older man with a baseball cap from a nearby lounge chair turned his head. He'd been reading a paperback, but clearly couldn't ignore the tension anymore. You all right over there, Patrice? He asked. Dennis blinked. Patrice nodded to the man. I'm good, Carl. Thanks. Dennis looked between them. The shift was almost imperceptible, but it was there. The realization that someone else recognized her, that maybe she wasn't the outsider he thought she was. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back off just yet. I just don't see why it's a big deal to confirm, Dennis muttered, now quieter but still persistent. This place has rules for a reason. Patrice sat up a little straighter. Her voice stayed low. You saw a black woman sitting alone and decided something was off. You didn't ask. You accused. You didn't check facts. You made assumptions. And now you're doubling down because you're embarrassed. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Not right away. It's not about that. Then what is it about? She asked, genuinely curious. Because you walked over here like a mall cop with something to prove. That stung. His mouth twitched. He looked over at Carl, then back at her. The pool was quieter now. Conversations hadn't stopped entirely, but there was a shift in the mood. Awareness. A few people were listening without looking like they were. I didn't mean to come off wrong, Dennis said finally, though the apology didn't sound like one. I just care about the community, that's all. And I've been part of this community longer than you've known how to spell the zip code, she said. Another pause. He didn't know what to do with that. She waited. He cleared his throat and took a step back, as if preparing to walk away. But his ego had one more line to get out. Look, he said, voice slightly strained. If you really live here, I guess there's no harm in showing proof. That's all I'm saying. But Patrice wasn't going to play by Dennis's rules. And soon enough, she wouldn't have to say a word to prove who she was. Dennis lingered. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't swearing. But Patrice knew this kind of confrontation didn't need volume to be aggressive. It was the way he positioned himself, blocking the sun a little, always just close enough to make his presence known, but far enough that it couldn't quite be called harassment. She let him stew in his own awkward silence for a few seconds before reaching into her tote bag. Not for her badge, yet, but for her water bottle. She unscrewed the top, took a sip, then calmly leaned back again like she had all the time in the world. "I don't know what you think is going to happen here," she said without looking up. Dennis crossed his arms. "I think you're making this into something it doesn't have to be." She looked at him now. "No, I think I'm watching you make it into something. You walked up with assumptions, and now you don't know how to back out without looking foolish." From across the pool, someone was watching. A teenager, maybe 16 or 17, sitting at the edge of the water with her phone in hand. She wasn't filming, yet, but her attention was clearly fixed on the conversation. Patrice noticed. So did Dennis. "Is this where you're going to make a scene?" he asked, trying to turn the tables. "No," Patrice replied. "But you already are." Luis, the lifeguard, finally noticed the energy shift. He pulled out one earbud and sat up a little taller. He wasn't getting involved. Yet. But even he could sense the situation teetering. Dennis exhaled through his nose and shook his head. "Unbelievable. I try to look out for the community, and this is what I get." Patrice raised her eyebrows. "No, what you're getting is pushback. Because you're not looking out for anyone. You're trying to control a space you just moved into." He scoffed loudly. "Wow. Okay, so now I'm the bad guy." "You're the loud guy," she corrected. The teen by the pool cracked a small smile at that. Dennis didn't. "I'm just saying," he continued, voice tight. "Rules matter. I've got a daughter. What if someone shady came in here pretending they lived here?" Patrice blinked. "And you decided I looked the part?" He paused again. That pause told her everything. "You think you're subtle, but you're not," she said. "You saw me. You judged me. And now you're scrambling because I didn't give you the reaction you expected." Dennis shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He was unraveling, slowly, still holding on to a sliver of perceived moral high ground, but the ground beneath him was getting shaky. "You could have just shown the fob, proved me wrong, and ended it. Or," she said, "you could have walked over here like a decent person, introduced yourself, and asked if I was new to the neighborhood. Instead, you came in hot, assumed I was trespassing, and now you're mad I didn't jump when you barked." His face flushed. Not bright red, but enough to see he wasn't used to being spoken to that way, especially not by someone who refused to be intimidated. From the side of the pool, the young mum with the toddler was watching now too. She didn't intervene, but she stepped a little closer to her child like she was bracing for something. Dennis looked around. The audience was growing. He straightened his back. "You know what? I'll talk to the HOA board. Let them sort it out." "You do that," Patrice said. "Be sure to tell them exactly what you said to me when you walked up." That made him pause again. "I've lived here 9 years, she added. "Served on the security committee twice. My name's on the HOA website under neighborhood safety." Dennis blinked. "Really?" he asked, his voice quieter. "Really?" Luis finally stood up, sensing things had reached a tipping point. "Everything okay over here?" he called out. "We're fine," Patrice answered. Dennis was clearly caught between retreating and pretending this was all still reasonable. But before he could speak again, a voice came from one of the lounge chairs behind him. "Patrice!" a woman called out. "You want us to call Ken from the board? He's at home right now." It was Mrs. Florence Godwin. She'd lived in the community longer than anyone. She didn't raise her voice, didn't even stand. But her words carried weight. Patrice gave her a small wave. "No need, Flo. Just a little misunderstanding." But Dennis was finally starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as in control as he thought, and his next move would say a lot more than his first. Dennis opened his mouth to speak again, but now it was different. The words didn't come as quickly. His posture changed. Arms no longer crossed, voice no longer sharp. That firm stance he'd kept since the start was starting to droop under the weight of public scrutiny. He looked around again. The mom with the toddler, the teen with the phone, Carl, Florence. Luis still watching from the lifeguard chair, one hand shading his eyes. Even the guy who'd been dozing in the shade had sat up. Patrice could feel the shift, too. The eyes weren't just on her anymore. They were on him, waiting to see what he'd do next. And Dennis knew it. "Look, if you're really Patrice Holman," he said, trying to smooth out his tone, "then I guess I owe you an apology." "You guess?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Dennis forced a chuckle. "Well, I mean, I didn't know. You weren't exactly announcing it." "Should I have?" she asked, eyes locked on his. He didn't answer. Patrice reached down into her bag again. But this time, she didn't move slowly. She took out her badge case and opened it fully, holding it in both hands, clear as day. Dennis took a step back. The gold badge gleamed in the sun, the nameplate unmistakable. City of Temecula. Chief of Police. Patrice L. Holman. Dennis blinked. Twice. His lips parted, but nothing came out. "You were saying something about rules?" she asked calmly. He swallowed hard. I didn't realize. I mean, you assumed," she said. He stammered. "I didn't mean anything by it." "Yes, you did," she said. Maybe not out loud, but it was loud enough. The teen at the pool's edge slowly lowered her phone. She didn't press record, but the moment had etched itself in her memory. Dennis scratched the back of his neck. "I wasn't trying to cause a scene." "No," Patrice said, standing up from her chair, her badge still in hand. "You were trying to control one." She was taller than him now, not because of her posture, because the weight of her words carried further than his ever could. "You came here to flex authority you don't have," she continued. "I carry mine every day, but I don't lead with it, because real leadership doesn't need to be loud." Dennis looked down. "I'm sorry." She let the silence sit for a few seconds. "You know, it's interesting. You could have had a real conversation today. You could have walked over and introduced yourself. I would have offered you a soda from the cooler." His face reddened again. "But instead, you tried to check me like I was stealing time in a space I've helped keep safe for almost a decade." Patrice closed the badge case, dropped it into a bag, and sat back down. Dennis didn't move. Florence stood now. Just once, just to say something simple. "We know who you are, Patrice. Always have. Appreciate you." Patrice gave a soft smile. "Thank you, Flo." Carl added, "Pool's all yours, Chief." Dennis stood frozen for a second more, then turned and quietly walked away, muttering something under his breath that no one bothered to catch. The toddler squealed with joy as she finally agreed to get into the water. Louise sat back down, both earbuds in again, and the rest of the pool began to reset to what it was before the interruption. Patrice pulled her sunglasses back over her eyes, took another sip of water, then leaned back into her chair, letting her shoulders drop just a bit. She didn't need to gloat, didn't need to yell. The badge wasn't the power, it was how she used it. And more importantly, when she didn't. But just because the confrontation was over didn't mean the story was. Word had already started to spread, and by tomorrow the whole neighborhood would know exactly what happened. By late afternoon, the sun had started to dip low enough to cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Families packed up beach towels, kids begged for 5 more minutes in the water, and the scent of sunscreen lingered in the breeze. But the conversation? That stuck around. Patrice didn't have to say a word. As she left the pool, towel draped over one arm and her sandals tapping gently against the pavement, heads subtly turned. Not in the way people gawk, but in that familiar ripple of curiosity and hush that follows when something worth retelling has just happened. She could hear it as she passed a pair of neighbors by the parking lot. "Did you see what happened with the new guy? That's Patrice Holman, right? The police chief?" "Yep." Poor man had no idea who he was messing with. Later that evening, she stood in her kitchen preparing a simple dinner. Grilled chicken, sliced avocado, and a sparkling water with lime. Nothing fancy. Just fuel. Her phone buzzed on the counter with a message from her friend Eliza, who lived 3 streets over. "Heard you had a poolside performance today. Is it true you flashed the badge?" Patrice smirked and tapped back. Didn't flash. Just reminded. She didn't crave attention. She didn't enjoy public conflict. But something about the moment felt necessary. Not for the sake of proving a point to Dennis, but for the people who had been watching and maybe wondering how they would have handled it. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. At the door stood Florence, still in her pool hat, holding a small Tupperware container. "I made too much pasta salad," she said casually. "Figured you could use a break from cooking." Patrice took it with a warm smile. "Thank you. That's kind of you." Florence lingered for a second, then said, "You handled him well." "Grace under pressure." Patrice nodded. "I've had practice. People noticed." Florence added, "Not just the bad part. The good part, too." Patrice didn't reply right away. She just leaned against the doorframe, letting that sink in. Before Florence left, she said one more thing. "Some of us were quiet today. Doesn't mean we weren't watching, or that we didn't feel what you felt." That landed heavier than expected. After she closed the door, Patrice sat on the couch, set the container beside her, and scrolled through her messages again. A few more had trickled in. One was from Carl. "Always respected how you carry yourself. Let me know if you need anything." Another was from Luis, the lifeguard. "Hey, Chief Holman. Sorry I didn't step in earlier. I should have. Just wasn't sure how to handle it. But I got your back. Always." She appreciated each one. They didn't change the day, but they added something to it, like small bricks reinforcing the quiet foundation of respect she'd spent years building. The next morning, she went for her usual walk through the neighborhood. It was early, barely 7 a.m., and the streets were still cool and shaded. As she passed the community bulletin board near the clubhouse, something caught her eye. A printout taped to the glass. Black text, bold letters. "Know your neighbors." Below it, a photo from a previous HOA event. Patrice, in uniform, shaking hands with a city councilman, smiling, present, visible. And under it, someone had scrawled in pen, "To the man who asked her to leave, maybe read the newsletter next time." She chuckled. Not out of spite, but out of something more grounded. Truth. As she turned to head back home, a teenage girl jogging past slowed down, pulled one earbud out and gave her a shy wave. "Hey, you're the police chief, right?" Patrice smiled. "That's me." "You were awesome yesterday." "Thanks," Patrice said. "But standing your ground shouldn't be considered awesome. It should be normal." The girl nodded, thoughtful, then jogged on. But Patrice knew this wasn't about what happened at the pool anymore. It was about what people took away from it, and who they might be the next time they see someone sitting alone, minding their own business. By Sunday morning, the poolside moment had turned into something bigger. Not viral in a citywide sense, but locally it had legs, the kind of story that spread by lawn chairs, through group texts, and between sips of coffee in cul-de-sacs. It started when Patrice walked into the Corner Roast, the small cafe off Jefferson Avenue she frequented after morning walks. The barista, a lanky guy named Jonah, grinned as she entered. "Chief Holman," he said, already reaching for her usual. "You've been trending on Nextdoor." She raised an eyebrow. "That right?" He nodded, chuckling. Something about a man at the pool getting educated real fast. She sighed, but with a half smile. "I didn't do anything special." Jonah handed her the cup. That's exactly why it stuck with people. As she left the cafe, she checked her phone and saw a new email from her assistant at the station. The subject line read, "You might want to see this." Inside was a screenshot of a post on the local neighborhood forum. "I witnessed something yesterday at the community pool that reminded me why respect matters. A woman was harassed for not looking like she belonged, only for her to reveal she was the actual chief of police. She handled it with composure I could only hope to have. For those who don't know Patrice Holman, you should. She's not just our chief. She's our neighbor." There were over 24 comments already, and none of them negative. Patrice set her phone down. She didn't need recognition. That was never the goal. But it meant something to see people talk about respect without needing it to end in an argument. No shouting, No viral meltdown, just a quiet line in the sand, drawn with dignity. That afternoon, her neighbor's son, 9-year-old Matteo, came by to return a garden hose she'd let them borrow the week before. "Hi, Miss Patrice," he said, standing at her front porch with big, curious eyes. "Is it true you arrested a man at the pool?" She laughed. "No, honey, I didn't arrest anyone." He frowned slightly. "But my mom said he got really scared when he found out you were the boss of the police." Patrice bent down a bit, eye level with him. He wasn't scared. He was just surprised. Sometimes people judge others too quickly. It's better to ask than assume. Matteo thought about that. Like when someone looks mean but they're just tired? "Exactly," she said. He handed her the hose. "You're really cool." She smiled. "Thanks, Matteo. So are you." After he left, Patrice stood in her doorway for a while, just thinking. About the day before. About all the days before that. About how many times she'd been second-guessed, talked over, or brushed aside because of her appearance, her skin, her gender, her age. None of that was new. But this time, the people who watched had seen something different. They saw what patience looks like, what restraint looks like, what it means to not take the bait. And in that, maybe a few of them would recognize something in themselves next time they found themselves watching, either too afraid to speak or unsure what side of the line to stand on. Patrice didn't need to change Dennis Whitlow. That wasn't her job. But maybe someone else at that pool, one of the kids, one of the neighbors, even that teenager with the phone, might think twice the next time they see someone getting cornered for simply existing in a space they've earned the right to be in. She took a deep breath, stepped back inside, and placed the garden hose by the back door. Her badge sat on the kitchen counter, still in its case. It hadn't moved since yesterday. And yet, somehow, it had done more work in 10 minutes by the pool than some people did in years behind a desk. But it wasn't the badge that made the statement. It was the calm behind it. And calm, in moments of pressure, is louder than noise will ever be. Monday morning rolled in, and with it came the slow return to routine. Garbage trucks rumbled down the streets. Sprinklers clicked on just before sunrise. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog barked at a passing jogger. Inside her home, Patrice was getting dressed for work. The uniform was pressed, the badge polished, the same routine she'd followed for over 2 decades, yet somehow it felt different today. Not because of what happened, but because of what it revealed. She glanced at herself in the mirror, fixing the collar on her shirt. There was nothing special about her reflection, just a woman over 50 who had worked hard to earn her position, someone who'd chosen responsibility over recognition, and professionalism over pride, more times than she could count. What Dennis tried to do at the pool wasn't new. It wasn't shocking. It was quiet, practiced, and familiar, and that's what made it so dangerous. Because moments like that often go unnoticed, unchecked. They slip through cracks in everyday life, wrapped in politeness and concern. But not that day. That day, he got the full mirror, clear, honest, and unflinching. As she poured her coffee, her phone buzzed again. This time it was from Ken, the HOA board president. "Heard about the pool incident. Don't worry, I spoke to Dennis this morning. He won't be bothering anyone again." She stared at the message for a second, then typed back a short reply. "Appreciate it. Let's focus on making sure no one else thinks they have the right to do what he did. Because that was the real point. It was never just about Dennis. It was about the quiet moments people let slide, the ones that chip away at dignity without leaving bruises, the ones that hide behind phrases like just asking questions or just trying to help, the ones that teach younger generations how to doubt before they understand. Later that day, a city employee brought Patrice a stack of mail that had been delivered to the wrong department. She flipped through it absent-mindedly until one envelope caught her attention. No return address. Handwritten. She opened it. Inside was a short note. Chief Holman, I don't know you personally, but I saw what happened. I saw how you handled it. My daughter did too. I think she learned more in 10 minutes watching you than she has in a year of school. Thank you for showing us the difference between authority and grace. It didn't have a name at the bottom. Just the words. A neighbor. She folded the note gently and slid it into her desk drawer. It wasn't about being a hero. Patrice didn't believe in that word. It was about being present. Holding the line. Not just for herself, but for every person who's ever been made to feel small in a space they had every right to exist in. And the next time someone tries to use arrogance as authority, she hoped they'd remember her, because sometimes silence can speak louder than shouting, and a calm, "I live here," can hit harder than any comeback. So if you ever find yourself in Patrice's shoes, in a moment where someone decides you don't belong, remember this. You don't have to raise your voice to stand your ground. You don't need to prove yourself to someone whose mind is already made up. And you definitely don't need to shrink so someone else can feel big. Carry yourself with the quiet kind of power, the kind that speaks for itself. And when people are watching, especially young ones, show them what self-respect looks like when it's calm, unshaken, and undeniable. If this story made you stop and think, even for a second, hit that subscribe button. Because we'll keep sharing stories like this. Stories that feel real, that speak the truth, and remind us that dignity is never something you need permission for.